Greetings and welcome back to the Department of Tangents podcast. I'm your host, Nick Zano. This week's episode features a conversation with Len Page of the Len Price 3 and new comedy from Tommy Ryman. In September, the Len Price 3 released their fifth studio album, Kentish Longtails, an album stacked with hooks and bristling with rock and roll energy. If you listened to the last episode, you heard that on Childish Words, the song I included after the interview. As I listened to the album more and more, I started hearing some of the snarl in the lyrics in songs like Meaningless Mouth or Nothing I Want or Ride on Coattails, and I started to wonder how this phone call would go. Was it going to be combative? Was I going to get through? And it turns out I had nothing to worry about. I'm happy to report that Mr. Page was nothing if not a gentleman, witty, humble, and open. You can hear a bit of that dynamic at the beginning of the conversation when I mentioned my thoughts listening to Page's lyrics. Yes, this is the guy who can spit out a phrase like, "You're full of booze and you're full of shit," but he's also the guy who can write poppy toe tappers like Pocket Full of Watches and Telegraph Hill. We talked about the targets of his lyrics, but also his influences from Syd Barrett and Simon and Garfunkel and Charlie Parker to poetry to things that happen in everyday life. He is incisive as a writer, but he's also very grateful for what the Len Price 3 has allowed him to do over the years. And the next album might be something a little bit different, and when that happens, I hope Mr. Page will come back on the show and talk about it. And as sometimes happens when I record at home, our cat Seiji makes an occasional cameo in the background, just in case you're wondering why there's meowing in a couple of parts. I'd have him on more often, but quite frankly, his questions stink. And as always, the podcast features new music or comedy at the end of the conversation. This week, it's a track from comedian Tommy Ryman's new album, Having the Time of My Life, which is out January 19th on Stand Up Records. And now, here's Len Page of the Len Price 3. Yes, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
That's all right. It's a pleasure.
I have to admit, listening to the album all day and then all this sort of hard-charging rock and roll, and then emailing you a few minutes ago and you saying, I need a few minutes to help my son with his work. There's sort of an incongruous feeling about that.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. The trials and tribulations of bringing up children, rock and roll, they're quite similar in a lot of ways, you know. A message that's driven by youthful energy, trying to get something across to a bunch of kids. It's, a lot of similarities, I think.
And you feel that when you're out playing? Do you feel like a dad, or when you're home, do you feel like rock star is kind of a hackneyed kind of phrase, but...
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think I live most of my life in a perpetual state of confusion, so I don't really know. I'm somewhere between the two.
You've said that all three of you have day jobs. What are your day jobs?
Okay, so I work for local government officer, and Steve, the bass player, he runs an auto electrical company, and Neil, the drummer, does something kind of wacky with computers and data systems that I don't fully comprehend.
Yeah, a lot of my favorite bands sort of have that. There's a band I really love from out west here called Richmond Fontaine. They were all sort of plumbers and electricians, and then they would come together and tour mostly England and the West Coast here. For some reason, it was more economically feasible for them to tour Europe and the West Coast than to make it over to the East Coast of the U.S.
Wow. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's sort of unusual, isn't it? I think, oddly enough, it's changed a bit, but there was a sort of period of time where we were finding it easier to kind of tour in Europe than play shows in England. And, in terms of playing in the USA, that's something we haven't done for about 10 years, and we just had an invitation to go and play in Las Vegas in February. So just trying to sort out the visas for that. But yeah, it's funny how those things work.
Yeah, the economic realities of touring when you're not on some giant label.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. You said about the new album that you wrote some of the tracks pretending you were writing for a different band. How did you approach that? Did you have a specific sound or specific other bands in mind?
It's a long time ago now. I'll tell you what I remember. I remember reading about the kind of making of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album. And sort of an interview with Paul McCartney about, they were going to kind of reinvent themselves and were sort of, going to be this band, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of thought that was a really interesting idea, and I thought it's kind of a good way of liberating yourself from, sort of like the usual way that you do things, because I think I got a bit stuck with our previous album. It's, I'm not a big, massive fan of our previous album, because I felt a bit like I was kind of stuck, which was partly, I think, because I was going through some difficult stuff in my kind of my sort of domestic life at the time, and I think that kind of wasn't helping. But
mm-hmm.
With this album, I tried to think about, what if I was in this kind of band or that kind of band? And so I think you get quite a lot of variations in. I don't know how familiar you are with the album, but a song like "Man in the Woods," as opposed to "You Paint Your Picture Well" or "Stop Start Lily," they're quite kind of different styles. So I was kind of thinking, in each case, what would it be like if I wrote if I was in a psychedelic band, what would that sort of sound like? And then, if I was, I'm quite into sort of like some late 80s, early 90s kind of British kind of indie bands. I was thinking, what would happen if I was writing songs for a band like that? What would that sound like?
Mm-hmm.
So, it was that kind of thing, really. I mean, quite a straightforward process, really, just thinking about, stuff that I like and what would it be like to write for a band in that sort of vein. So, that's the way I did it.
Mm-hmm. Well, in that case, it sounds like it's not terribly different than when you started. I've read interviews where you said, you're just playing the kind of things you like to play.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I suppose that you inevitably, if you're trying to do stuff that reflects kind of what you like, then I suppose, it's just it's a different way of thinking about what you're doing as opposed to an actual different process, if that kind of makes any sense.
Hmm. Oh, where did the three of you meet? How did you guys get together?
Well, I've known Neil, the drummer, for about 20 years or something, because we met. I kind of just got out of university, and I was in a different band at the time, and we were looking for a drummer, and Neil was recommended to us as someone that could play the drums, although he was actually a bass player by trade.
Uh-huh.
So we did a couple of things together back in the mid to late 90s. Had a bit of a break from it, and then sort of somewhere in the early 2000s, I started writing songs again and asked Neil to come and play drums while we sort of demoed them up. And then sort of we took the view it'd be good to get out and kind of play the songs live, but I didn't know any other bass players at the time. So Neil had been playing in some other bands, and Steve kind of was one of the connections from one of these other bands. So that kind of became the three-piece originally for like, one or two shows, and then, we just kind of, forgot to give up, so we just kept going.
And that's where you changed the name to Len Price 3 somewhere along the line. Yeah. Was there? I read the story somewhere that you changed it so you could get back into a club that thought you were too noisy.
Yeah. Well, when we started out, the first place that we used to practice, they told us we were too noisy the first time we booked it, and told us never to come back. So we booked it for the following week under a different name, and I sort of snuck in. We just sort of switched the names around, and that it just kind of kept it kind of stuck with us. So that was that.
Did you think you were going to be Len Price 3 for the next 15 years?
Not really. I mean, I think at the time we were just we didn't really give it any thought, to be honest with you. There was a slight element of like, when we were really thinking of what names could we call ourselves. One, the Len Price 3 came up as a sort of, we wanted a name that was deliberately not very kind of trendy and not very sort of fashionable and kind of almost like anti-showbiz. And so, and also, me and Neil in particular were beginning to feel like maybe we were past making it as kind of proper musicians, because that was a kind of young the name kind of stuck because of that. And the story where Len Price kind of comes from is like I went through a phase where it still happens now. Actually, people get my name wrong, so it's a sort of an amalgamation of a surname and a forename that people had called me by mistake, and it just kind of stuck from there.
It's not a tough name, though. That's odd.
It's not a tough name. It's a very unshowbiz name, kind of an old geezer's name.
Now, were all of you on the same page sonically from the beginning?
We certainly had some sort of, the kind of the main points of crossover really were sort of 60s bands like the Beatles in particular, and then the sort of the Who and the Rolling Stones and people like that, the Kinks, of course. And then I think we also had some bands that maybe, if you imagine like a kind of a Venn diagram, weren't kind of like necessarily like all of us, but maybe two of us like them. So me and Steve were quite into the Pixies and Guided by Voices, and me and Neil were kind of into some jazz musicians and stuff. Mm-hmm. So there was some variation there.
Well, how deliberate is the sound? Did you set out to achieve a particular vibe, or did it just sort of come out that way?
Well, I think there's two things. When I was sort of setting this band up, the kind of the sort of sound I was going for was a sort of Medway bands type sound, in as much as there is a sort of a Medway sound. I was kind of thinking of a band called the Len Price Combo, not to be confused with the Len Price 3. Mm-hmm. And there were the sort of Billy Childish bands like the Mighty Caesars and the Headcoats. Mm-hmm. And then later kind of got into the Prisoners, and it was a very kind of raw sort of stripped back sound with a sort of vintagey sound to it. Now, as it happens, me and Neil had kind of vintage equipment anyway, so we were kind of playing through that stuff, and Steve got into that subsequently. And it's a sound that we always liked, and it's a bit kind of hackneyed to talk about this stuff now, but Neil and I kind of grew up in the 1980s, and it was pretty obvious to us growing up that the sound that people were making in guitar music land wasn't quite like the old days, and we sort of hankered after that really. So it would be fair to say that we strived for that sort of a sound, and we had the equipment there to do it. So that's what we did, and we sort of stuck with it really, because that's kind of the sound that we like.
The first place I heard of you was oddly enough on Little Steven's Christmas album, the Underground Garage Christmas album years ago. Yeah. And
I remember.
Yeah.
That track, yeah.
It's Christmas Time, Ebenezer.
Well, that's the one.
That's the song. When I spoke to him about that album, he said there were a lot of bands on that album that were new and a lot of bands that were old, and he enjoyed the fact that he could mix them up and people couldn't tell if a particular song was old or new. Do you enjoy that sort of thing as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I think particularly in relation to kind of rock music, rock and roll music, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I think that it's been kicking around for a long time now, and I think particularly with the advent of sort of the internet and all that kind of stuff. We live in a world where you can people are accessing so much different music, from all periods, from all parts of the world, kind of all the time, and I really love that kind of mix up of songs, styles, sounds, vintages and geographies. I think it's interesting. I think it is easy to to identify stuff that has, I don't really know what the word is, but the kind of the right sort of spirit and energy to it, and stuff that doesn't. I think it was Jimi Hendrix that said that there's only two types of music, good music and bad music. So I think that sort of approach and just thinking about there's a load of good music out there from across the ages, and it's and some of it has a certain sort of spirit and honesty and soul to it, and some of it perhaps doesn't. So it's about picking out the stuff that does.
I want to go back for just a second to the Medway sound. I'd never heard that phrase until I started researching for this interview. Do you think there is a Medway sound? Do you think you fit that description?
When I use the term the Medway sound, I'm using it as a sort of, I suppose it's a sort of an easy label. I mean, I suppose in all honesty, there probably isn't a thing called the Medway sound, but there are a group of musicians, many of whom have been in different bands but with different names, but it's the same group of musicians. I'm talking about bands that started out like the Prisoners, so that featured a guy called Graham Day, Alan Crockford in particular, who've been in lots of bands kind of together and separately. And then Billy Childish, probably the most famous example, but there's also the Len Price combo. And when they were kind of kicking around in the 80s, it was really a kind of reaction to the whole kind of 80s sort of, over sanitised kind of, commercially sort of sound, and getting back to a bit of a 60s and, sort of 70s punk kind of ethic of, raw sound and, sort of like two mics on the drum kit instead of a, mic for absolutely every piece of it. So we, that was definitely something we kind of switched on to. But, I wouldn't want to give people the impression that there are loads of bands running around in Medway doing that sort of thing, because there really aren't. There's a kind of a group of musicians that, that have been in bands since, whatever, the mid-80s or something, doing that kind of thing.
I'm not familiar with the Medway sound or most of the bands you mentioned, so now I have more homework to get out there and
get out there and check it out. Yeah, definitely.
And find out who would you say are the bands to definitely listen to if this is the first time you're hearing that phrase.
If you were starting out, well, you could. I'll tell you about my particular journey in which I quite enjoyed. There's a band called the Mighty Caesars, which is one of Billy Childish's bands, and also Graham Day, who was in the Prisoners, went on to play was the drummer in that band. So I'd say the Mighty Caesars, and I would say the Len Price combo and the Prisoners. That's probably And then if you feel like you enjoy that stuff, I would go with probably the Headcoats and the Buff Medways. And I would say that you also want to reference Graham Day and the Jailers.
All right, so I've got my list cut out for me to listen to.
Graham Day and the Jailers featured rhythm section from the Woggles. I don't know if you know them. American band, actually, but yeah.
You get a lot of different descriptions as well. I've seen mod, garage rock, power pop, pop punk. Do any of them fit what you do you think? Or do you think any of them are accurate?
I don't know. I tend not to get I tend not to get into the whole labels thing. I kind of let other people worry about that. It's not really something I'm kind of that interested in it, so I'll go back to that Jimi Hendrix thing about, there's only three types of music, good or bad, so, what label people want to attach to it, I don't really see the need for that. I mean, I think the mod thing is quite interesting, because I suppose probably since our last album, we seem to be picking up a lot of stuff where people are saying, they're a mod band or identifying us as a mod band. And I sort of get where that's kind of come from, because there was a time going back about 6 or 7 years where we had these sort of like stupid kind of band uniforms that we wheel out every now and again. And one of the outfits we had was a sort of stripy boating blazer type look. And I think that was probably the thing that people latched onto as, yes, a mod band. So I mean, we've never claimed to be a mod band, and certainly if you saw us kind of just knocking around in our everyday lives, no one would ever think, those three lads are, they're mods. No one would say that. But it's just, that's what's happened. I think we attract quite a lot of mods to our shows, and I guess that's partly because kind of mods are interested in music, and we're a three-piece band, and we're kind of 60s inspired. So I guess people will draw parallels with bands like the bands like the Jam, and obviously the influence of the Kinks and the Who. So I kind of get why that happens, but we never claimed to be a mod band. And there was a funny comment about one of our videos, saying, this is, I can't remember it, like, this is ridiculous. This has absolutely nothing to do with the mod movement. And my response was kind of, well, I never said we're part of the mod movement. Why are you judging us by that particular criterion? It's kind of completely off the mark. But that's the thing, isn't it? Like there we are, some people saying we're mods, we don't think we're mods, but then other people saying we're not mod enough. So, I don't know, I suppose if I was going to talk about what we do, I would like to think that we're probably a pop band, but we like to do things with a bit of a kind of a punk kind of attitude in terms of doing it ourselves and, and having a bit of urgency and kind of aggression to a lot of the stuff. And, maybe it's just, I don't know, it's just kind of like, decent music, I hope. That's sort of what it's semi-label I would attach to it. Decent, quite good.
Yeah, well, all of those descriptors. What did you say?
Adequate.
That's a whole new movement now, the adequate movement.
The adequate movement, yeah, I might start that up, just after this interview. Yeah.
What kind of...
I know one thing, when we started the band, I kind of had been through a phase of kind of going out to check out a lot of bands, and, something that I found quite depressing was that a lot of people I was seeing were kind of just sort of standing around, kind of being quite fey and, too cool for school, and, just really boring and not really looking like they were kind of meaning it. And I was always into things like, well, whether it's kind of Little Richard or whether it's Iggy Pop or whether it's, Johnny Rotten or, like Nirvana or someone, or Sam and Dave or, Wilson Pickett, just people that kind of were just, really ripping out their guts, to sort of just really put something across and just really lay it on the line. So, that's where the kind of the sort of energetic sort of delivery stuff comes from us.
Well, you've been critical of bands that sort of are just playing dress up. So how do you sort of reconcile that with having band uniforms?
It's nothing. There's no great secret to it. It's just a case of like we spent ages sort of sitting around thinking about, what's the best thing to wear when you're playing a gig? Don't really know. Well, why don't we just get a top that's all the same, and then we don't have to think about it when we turn up to the show? So, so we went out and bought a load of stripy jerseys, and so that was it. So yeah, it's just sort of practicality. It's not really a shirt if you're on a football team or something.
What inspires you to write a song? What makes you sit down at the guitar and start putting something together?
Well, that's something I've actually been thinking about quite a lot recently because, and oddly enough, I don't think I have really thought about it before. But I was having a conversation with an old friend of mine, a guy called Jamie, who he's done the artwork on the last couple of albums. And, we were having a bit of jovial humour, and he said, everything I write about is always so kind of negative and, not this, or I don't want that, or whatever. And I was sort of reflecting on it. I was thinking, you know what, you're quite right. And I think the thing is that without really knowing it over the last, 15 years or whatever it is, how long we've been going, the songs have all been basically my own kind of like way of, it's like my own therapy, really. It's where I put all the stuff that I'm angry about or pissed off about or really sad about or have never really resolved in my life. They've all kind of gone into songs. I mean, there is sort of positive stuff in there as well. I mean, particularly the last album, there's a sort of, there's a, what is a fairly, well, it's a love song, basically, for my wife, and there's, there's a song about my kids, and that's all really positive stuff. And then there's plenty of songs on there about, other, relatives or heroes or whatever that are quite, positive. But there's a lot of, I'd have to accept that there's quite a lot of anger and frustration and stuff that goes in. And I think perhaps that's one of the reasons why I started writing songs, just as a way of expressing all that kind of negative stuff. Because, in my life, I'm quite an easygoing sort of bloke, and, I like to think that I kind of, I'm reasonably reliable for my wife and my kids, and, a reasonably balanced temper, so I have to put all the kind of the bad vibes somewhere, so they go into a box called songwriting, I suppose.
And is it cathartic to play songs like Ride on Coattails and Childish Words?
Yeah, I think it is. I particularly when we're playing live, and it's kind of quite an energetic experience. It's like a way of just really letting everything go. I mean, there's a guy called Paul Slattery. He's a sort of a rock photographer, and he's kind of he's an old mate of ours. He comes to quite a lot of our shows when we play in London, and he's a really interesting character because he's been taking photos of bands, since the 70s or something, and he's hung out with some, truly rock and roll people, people like Bon Scott from AC/DC, Lemmy from Motorhead. He hung out with Oasis when they were kind of doing their first UK tour and stuff like this. So he's a proper old-fashioned kind of rock and roller. And he's always amused that, when we're on stage, we're quite lively and jumping around and really full on. But actually, the three of us aren't particularly rock and roll people. We don't drink, really. Before we play, we certainly don't take any drugs. And there's, actually nothing to do with women going on backstage. It's all just very, calm and, tea drinking, really. In fact, we did one time, one of my favourite stories about being tea drinkers is we did this gig in Denmark once. And there was this massive rider of beer and whiskey and all sorts of stuff. And I went to the kind of stage manager guy and said, this is all very nice, but actually all we want is a cup of tea. And he just thought, he actually said, tea? Are you guys perverts or something? And he just thought it was like really obscene. So that was us, really, perverts for drinking tea.
That sounds like that could be a concept album.
Probably, yeah.
Perverts.
Yeah, he was this big kind of Viking, like Thor-like character. And he insisted that we had to drink, and then he demonstrated how to drink, which was quite interesting.
That was the problem. You didn't know how.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you open the bottle like this, and then basically down this big bottle of beer in one.
I find that
warrior.
I find that I interview a lot of comedians. That's mostly what I do for my day job, and I find that sort of people expect that same sort of thing. Somebody's sort of wild on stage or always sarcastic. They expect them to be that way off stage, and a lot of them are just sort of more quiet, keep to themselves sort of people.
Yeah, most of the musicians I know, actually, like people that we kind of knock around with doing music. They are quite kind of introverted people, sort of. When they're in their kind of day-to-day life kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I would say some of them are significantly more rock and roll than us, but there is a certain sort of introverted characteristic, I think, that's shared by a lot of us.
So, what makes you put something like Childish Words out there? I understand the writing of it being cathartic and the playing, but that if you've got that sort of introverted personality, throwing something like that out there in the world, it's going to come back to you, right? Yeah, I think it's because it just kind of, I think it's partly, some songs just kind of like, they're like a little volcano in that they just come out of you and you can't stop them. You don't really think about what you're doing. It just kind of comes out. And then what happens is some of those songs get recorded, and if it's a good song, as a band, we're quite, I'm not sure what the word is, but basically, if there's a song that we've done and it's really gonna, we think it's gonna kind of like affect someone, or there's gonna be some sort of kickback, we wouldn't be thinking about that. We'd be thinking, is it a good song? Does it merit sharing with people on the basis that it's got something to it? Mm-hmm. I think in the case of that, I mean, that particular song, there was quite a lot of energy behind that, because there'd been two books that came out about the sort of the Medway scene, and there were some comments in there by some people that weren't that kind about us, and that's fine, because I mean, obviously people have different views about stuff, and it'd be really boring if people agreed all the time. But the thing that was really frustrating about it was that we never got a chance to reply, and there was no kind of interview for us about any of the comments in there, or whatever. In fact, I wasn't approached at all about it, about anything in the books.
So, and that was, at the time, that was really, really frustrating. So the song just kind of came out, you know. And then, and we quite enjoyed doing it. So we just thought, wow, you know, let's just kind of go with it. And that was that. I know what you mean about the kind of, you know, the introvertedness, but, you know, it just, yeah, like I say, some things just have a life of their own.
Well, that was, not to sort of get into the gossip of it, but that was directed at Billy Childish, correct?
Well, that's
maybe not exclusively, but
I would say, is it directed at Billy Childish? I would say there is a specific couple of lines in that song that are about Billy Childish. The rest of it is actually about comments by other people, and I suppose the core, what I'm thinking about when I'm singing the chorus is a sort of, there is a kind of a sort of perceived wisdom, and it kind of is in the sort of, you know, in these two books, but it is a little bit wider in terms of the world of art and music, you know, particularly around, you know, this my little section of the universe, where kind of, you know, Billy's views are almost taken as a kind of gospel, and kind of aren't challenged, at least publicly, because it's almost like, you know, you see these kind of too cool to challenge, and, you know, and I kind of think, you know, I quite like a lot of what Billy does and a lot of what Billy says, but I also think a lot of it is a load of, you know, rubbish, to be honest. And I'm not saying anything here that I haven't, you know, said, you know, publicly into him, and me and him have actually had an exchange of words over it, you know, via email recently about it. We're quite cool with, you know, with each other. I mean, he'll say, you know, he said some stuff in a book which I took sort of umbrage to, and was one of the factors, and it is only one of them. Yeah, one of the things that kind of led to that song. You know, he's got some stuff in print. I've got some stuff on record, so I guess we're even. But yeah, it doesn't mean we're not. You know, we're at war. You know, it's far from that.
Well, so it works.
It just sort of reflects a sort of frustration at the time, and also just challenging the view that Billy's word is gospel, which, you know, he would probably say that's true as well.
So it worked then. You got it in terms of catharsis. You got it out there. Now you've had your words, and you're fine.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Can you still play it with the same sort of bite now then?
Yeah, because as I say, it's not. You know, the song isn't really about Billy. A lot of people think that it's actually about. Well, it's actually about some other people that, you know, maybe, you know, we haven't made full peace with. But it's also about the, you know, view that, you know, one person's view is, you know, is the gospel. That kind of perceived, because there's always two sides to every story. So, you know, it's like, I hate to use a sort of pompous word, but, you know, for me, it's like about being iconoclastic and saying, you know, you can't, you know, holding people up as idols is always a bad thing. Because, you know, there's always another view, and no one's ever 100% right all the time.
There's another song on here, or another song called Lisa Baker. Is there a real Lisa Baker? I looked it up. There's a Pennsylvania senator. I can't imagine that that's who it's about.
No. That's just someone that when I was a teenager I had a big crush on at school, and she was kind of a wild child. So yeah, but she's just sort of like, you know, kind of a spicy character. I don't really know what happened to her, to be perfectly honest. But it's kind of interesting.
So I've seen the word vicious pop up quite frequently in reviews of the albums. Do you think that's fair? Do you think people concentrate on that part of what you do too much?
I wouldn't say whether it's fair or unfair, because I think, you know, people will take from it what they want to take from it. As I've said to you already, you know, I think it would be a fair point to say that there's a lot of stuff, you know, in the songs that I write, you know, that are, you know, me venting spleen at things or people, or usually actually behaviours that I find frustrating and upsetting. You know, I like to think I've never had a go at anyone in song that, you know, I like to think that whoever I go for in song tends to deserve it. You know, it's kind of generated feelings of kind of frustration or anger because of people's selfishness or, you know, unpleasantness to other people, or indeed, in some cases, I'm just trying to burst bubbles where people think that they are, higher and mightier than other people. That's all. It's kind of like the musical equivalent of like comic caricatures, I suppose.
I was just going to say there's sort of a history of that back and forth, and it's not always as ugly as people think. Neil Young has played Sweet Home Alabama in concert apparently, and was a big Leonard Skinner fan. The Drive-By Truckers wrote a whole album about that.
Yeah,
it's not quite always as ruthless as people think.
No, that's right. And I read a review about the song Lisa Baker being like quite. I don't know if the word vicious was used, but when I read it, I was a bit like, really? Because in my mind, the song Lisa Baker is a sort of like, that's me as a teenage boy, in awe of someone and not quite sure how to kind of interpret, this kind of wild behaviour, and at the same time being strangely attracted to it. So it's not, I think you're right. I think it's kind of it's a matter of interpretation sometimes.
Well, one of my favorite tracks on the album might be one of the most pointed tracks, and it's also one of the catchiest. It's Meaningless Mouth. You're singing this, there's obviously a target here, but you're not snarling your displeasure. You're singing, and it's really tuneful. Do you enjoy that kind of contrast, that sort of darker lyrics with a happier sounding music?
Yeah, I suppose I do. I never. It wasn't a deliberate thing, but somebody else pointed that out a few years ago. Saying that we sound quite happy even when we're delivering, something really dark lyrically. I went through a phase of writing a lot of songs that seemed to be sort of like about death, but they always had kind of like quite sort of chirpy tunes going along with them. So I wouldn't say that it's it's intentional. I mean, I think, but in the case of that particular song, believe it or not, there wasn't actually a specific target for that. It was, there were a couple of bands that I saw watching TV coverage of Glastonbury a few years ago, and that they were an influence, but the lyrics weren't specifically about them. And then, of course, there's the whole over here X Factor. I think is it American Idol over where you are, sort of thing where people kind of go on TV and then they get kind of made into pop stars. So it's all that kind of culture, really, And that thing about almost kind of like, I don't really know how to describe it, but that's sort of like, when I was talking about good music, bad music, and you go, so good music in my world, if you go back over the generations or now, it is about people with really putting their soul on the line, and it's really they're really sort of exposing themselves, but not in a kind of pervy way. Really,
right? Yes.
It's something really visceral that kind of comes out, And then when you get that kind of whole cynical thing of, this is what it's going to take to make me famous and to generate a lot of money and get me on TV and all the rest of it, that just scares the hell out of me, really. And it seems so ultimately vacuous as well, in that the people that sort of end up on X Factor, I mean, with a couple of exceptions, they seem to just sort of disappear into kind of cabaret land within what seems like a very short space of time. And there's something quite sad about it. And I think that's the thing, actually. Like you said, with Meaningless Mouth, it's kind of, it's not really snarling and shouting and having a go. It's kind of it's a sad sort of sound to it, And I suppose that's kind of how I feel about it, really. That a lot of people will think that is what music is, or what music is about.
The people who take that time to build instead of trying to look for that lightning strike of fame, frequently they seem to do better off, because their fandom gets bigger over time, whereas for somebody who has that one big hit, it sort of wanes.
Yeah, and I sort of wonder as well. I mean, it's kind of, I suppose it's easy for me to say this as a sort of guy in my mid-40s, sort of like doing this as a kind of hobby, essentially. There was a time when I was I probably started from when I was about 15, going till I was about 25, 30, or whatever. I probably would have said, I'd love to be, a famous musician and, not make like loads of money, but like make enough money so I could live off of being a musician, going off on tour and, playing gigs and all the rest of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose there is a part of me that thinks, doing music is all I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's something also quite, there's something a little bit scary about that in the sense that I would never want it to become something that becomes like a job and something I have to do.
Right.
Because I can't help but feel that might be something that takes, sucks the energy out of it and the enjoyment out of it. Part of, I guess, why I do it and I enjoy it so much is because it's not what I do on a daily basis. It's like it's a slightly more treasured thing. Maybe that's...
It gives you
that
just...
kind of makes sense. Like, you kind of value it and treasure it a bit more. It's not like a money-making, cash cow type thing. It's something you do for the love of it and for the, the positive energy and vibes it brings. It's not a career.
Mm.
It's not like writing a CV and going to a job interview and the day-to-day grind. So, so I sit here as a middle-aged chap thinking, maybe I've got the balance about right.
Well, it gives you enough that you can go back and record the next album and play some gigs. I would assume that it funds itself.
Yeah, it's sort of self-sustaining. Yeah, of course, yeah.
And you recorded this one mostly in garages, right?
Yeah, so what we found with this particular recording was that we were really struggling to kind of we were struggling to get into a room at the same time. We were also struggling with, sort of particularly in the early part of the recording, when you're doing the backing tracks, you need like a significant block of time, in a recording studio. I think last few albums, I think it'd be fair to say all of the albums up to this one, we'd go into a studio for a week, 2 weeks initially, and then there'd be like the mock-up sessions, like doing bits and bobs, just overdubs and stuff. But we just knew we weren't going to have that amount of time for this album, for all sorts of reasons to do with work, family commitments and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we did, we kind of we took the view, and also we had a bit of a kind of a cash flow issue, which is a contractual matter, but not really a big deal anymore at the time. So we kind of took the view that the best way of doing it is just to buy our own gear and record it ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
And we usually get together once a week or once every couple of weeks to kind of practice work on new stuff anyway. So we said, well, you know what, we'll just build this into what would normally be our rehearsal time and we'll just kind of record as we go.
Mm-hmm.
So we started recording and we did backing tracks in Steve's garage, where he's got his auto electrical business, and then we did a lot of the overdubs there, but we also did some singing and little guitar parts and stuff around in Neil's shed. So it was, it's quite nice, a little homely thing. We'd kind of, finish work, go around to wherever we were recording, like set the gear up, record, go home. It was quite hard work because it meant not, often not wrapping up till kind of midnight, getting home at 1 o'clock in the morning, up for work in the morning at 6 or whatever, and surviving the day. But it's good fun. We were really pleased with how it turns out. I mean, for us three in the band, it's our favourite album done. I'm not saying it's our best because I think that's a personal, that's a very personal, subjective thing. But from our point of view, it's the one we like the most.
Yeah, it feels like everybody's favorite album is the first one they heard by a particular band, no matter where it sort of falls. Yeah. Did you have any sort of, not pressure, but did the label ask you, is there something new coming up? How does that relationship work?
No, that's all quite relaxed, I'd have to say, the label and recording. Very, the guys, the label manager, very supportive and very enthusiastic about what we do. But absolutely, and there was never any kind of like, come on, need some product now or whatever. And to be honest, I don't think we've ever been in a situation like that. I mean, our first record label was an Australian one, and that was so laid back it was unbelievable. And then we got the sort of little Stevens label, and they were very supportive about what we were doing. I think that was a different experience of what being on a record label is all about, because they sort of took an interest in what we were doing and you know wanted to have an input into some of the recording and all this kind of stuff. So it's a different set of challenges. And then you know this one has just been very sort of supportive and encouraging, and you know certainly no sort of deadline pressures or anything like that.
How did you wind up switching to this one from Little Steven's Wicked Cool label?
It's a long time ago, to be honest with you, because we're going back about 7 or 8 years now. I think we just sort of fancied a change. I think there probably was some political stuff going on, but you know, I mean, I'm not suggesting that there's any sort of friction or anything between us and Steve, not in the slightest.
He's obviously a big fan.
Sorry, mate, what was that?
Well, I said he's obviously a big fan. He obviously loves the band.
Yeah, I mean, it was really sweet how we kind of hooked up with him. I mean, we did a so our first album came out in May of 2005, and then in sort of March 2006, we had a little trip to America lined up. We went to South by Southwest, and on the way down, we stopped off in New York to play a show in the Village, and this gig that we did, there were like 3 people in the audience, and one was my wife, was my old university mate who happens to live in America, in New York now, and the other guy was Steve Van Zandt, and he came over, for a chat at the end, and basically said, "Do you want to sign to my label?" So we were, do that. And it was quite interesting because none of us are kind of, we're not particularly, none of us are kind of Springsteen fans. We knew who he was. We knew about the Street Band and the rest of it. Not massive fans, but nonetheless, I remembered seeing him on. There was a kind of free Nelson Mandela concert on British TV back in about 1988 or something like this. So I remember seeing him on there. Hey, who's this guy? And there he was, like sort of, asking us to sign to his record label. So it was quite cool.
Getting back to the new album, do you write at all thinking about how you're going to play live? There are a few more sounds on this one than maybe you would have had on the on previous albums.
Yeah, it certainly goes through your mind. I mean, I think there's always a part of you that's thinking like, how are we going to do this live? And so inevitably most of the songs kind of guitar, bass, and drums, because I only really play the guitar. And, you do think about it, but I would have to say that, when I'm sitting down to write a song, I don't go, right, I'm going to write just a bunch of songs that we can do live. I might sit down and go, right, I feel like I need another rocker or, whatever, or a big poppy anthem-y type one. But if the song doesn't suit that, if the song suits another particular mode of delivery, then we'll go that way. So Pocket Full of Watches would be an example. I did write on that on the guitar, as a little sort of strum along number, but we just started playing with it, thought it might sound quite good on the piano. And then when we did it, I was a bit like, I just like the piano. I'm not really that fussed about the guitar. So we kind of, made it a kind of piano kind of driven song, really. So that was that.
Would you ever pick up another player, the Len Price 3+1, so you could have that sort of...
We have been known to do that from time to time. So we had a launch gig in London back in September, and we had Graham Day, the guy I was talking about earlier, from various Medway bands. He's a very, very good musician. So he joined us on stage for about, probably 5-6 songs in the end, where he added an extra guitar or keyboard to a few songs. And there's a guy called Jim Riley who plays harmonica on a few tracks for us, and he tends to only come out when we play like where we live in Medway. He'll come out and play there, tends not to travel. We're not averse to the idea of wheeling out the extra person, but it does tend to be sort of someone that comes along and joins us as a guest rather than a sort of long-term fully paid up member of the band, which I think is partly because me, Steve, and they're quite a tight little unit, musically speaking, so having someone sort of join that relatively late in the day could be quite difficult. It's, there's no real money in it, so it'd have to be someone that really loves the band, and actually if you're then it's not worth their while.
Right.
And also, I kind of tend to think, when I think about, bands I've liked, in my time, I always prefer it when it's just the band rather than when they get like loads of extra people in. When I think of the Beatles, I think of the Beatles. Billy Preston was great, but when I think about when I really like the Beatles, Billy Preston probably wouldn't be in that lineup. Same with the Clash when they got a keyboard player in for one of their tours in '79 or something.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. We just get people in every now and again.
Do you ever write songs that wouldn't fit the Len Price 3? Do you finish those, or do you make them fit?
Well, I think do we do songs that wouldn't fit the Len Price 3? I mean, if you take a song like Pocket Full of Watches, or go back to some of our earlier stuff like, I don't know, Australia or something, there's there are songs that you could probably say wouldn't fit the Len Price 3, but I tend to take the view that if we've written them or if we've played them and recorded them, then they're a Len Price 3 song, and that kind of becomes the style. I mean, I quite like the idea of next album trying to do something that's really different. Maybe, I don't know, like sort of more electronic or whatever. I'm not talking sort of soft sell, but maybe just sort of Depeche Mode, nothing like that. But just introduce something that's just kind of completely sort of different to what we've done before. If I think about like songs that Noel Gallagher's done with the Chemical Brothers, or some of the Primal Scream kind of dancey sort of krautrock influenced stuff or whatever, I'm kind of thinking maybe we could do something a bit like that. I've always Tomorrow Never Knows by the Beatles on the Revolver album is one of my favourite songs of all time, and I was kind of thinking, could we do something that's got a bit of a hypnotic kind of loopy feel to it, but without losing the kind of rock and rolly sort of vibe. So who knows what I'll come, because at the end of the day it's just going to be about what I've managed to come up with, sitting down in my little room with my guitar and other set of records and thinking about what we might be able to create.
Do you have to worry about your fan base doing something that you've created a very specific sound? Do you have to worry about going off of that, going too far away from that?
I don't think I have to worry about anything. Like I said, part of the joy of doing this as a sort of add-on to my life is we can do what we like. There is no pressure other than what we might put in ourselves. I mean, I think it's funny when we were kind of like, when we had all the songs recorded for the album, when we were trying to get our head around which ones were going to go on the album, what the running order was going to be. We shared the tracks with some friends, sort of trusted confidants, and I remember one guy saying to me, "There's some great pop songs on here, and you've got your kind of the traditional kind of Len Price 3 sort of rockers." And his take on it was he'd love to see us sort of shave the kind of traditional rockers out of it and just have it as this kind of pure sort of pop record. But he did say, but I understand that you've got a pressure to deliver to a certain sort of audience. And I was thinking, well, it's interesting you say that there's a pressure, because I don't feel that. We just put the songs on that we feel we like the best, and I think the thing is, when I like punk, punky, rocky songs, but I also like really nice pop songs as well. So I think the thing is that when we do an album, there's always a bit of a mix, So at the same time as like it, wishing I could make, Sergeant Pepper or or sort of a record like that. I'll always want to put on some songs that sound a bit like the Undertones or the Clash or whatever. And I don't really see that changing. I think if we do it, assuming we do another record, because you can never assume that these things pan out as you want. But if we do one, I assume it will be similar in the sense that there will be a spread of sounds and spread of different styles of song. But I suppose what I'm saying is that I'd like that spread to go out a little further than it has before. So, if we're going to include some sort of like, dancey, electronic-y, jazzy type influences, then that would be brilliant as far as I'm concerned. But there'll probably still be some sort of punky, poppy ones on there as well,
Have you already started writing stuff for a next album?
I've got a few bits and pieces lying around, and actually I'm going to try. One of the things I'm thinking about doing, I've been talking to the boys about, is I want to try and do things slightly differently this time. In that I've got a few songs which I've written in the sort of traditional manner, but I'd like to be able to kind of take them along and let's say, pull them apart a bit. Say let's try and whatever, getting rid of the guitars on this one, or what about if we do this a cappella or something like it, just really mess them up a bit.
Mm.
And the other thing is that I want to try writing songs that aren't, in a different way, that isn't just me sitting in a room, but it might be, we do things in a slightly more sort of jammy type, kind of way of just making it up as we go along, maybe sitting in a room with a riff and a few lyrics and sort of pootling along that way, rather than me going along with the song pretty much fully formed. See where that takes us. It might all fall flat on its arse, but I mean, I'd like to just try a couple of different ways of going about it and see what occurs.
Well, as long as the hook is still there, the hook seems to be the thing, no matter what kind of song you're writing.
Yeah, whatever style, I think you're right. Has it got that little bit of magic about it? Yeah, I agree.
Well, Saturday Morning Film Show is very contagious, I found. I was listening to the album driving around doing errands today and singing harmonies to it.
Yeah.
Is there an art to crafting that kind of catchy melody? How much do you have to fiddle with it once you get that sort of rough draft to get it?
I think the melody is... I would genuinely say we don't really work at the melody, because the melody is just whatever comes out at the very... that's the thing that's the rawest, I suppose. That's the thing, if I'm sitting down strumming my guitar and humming a tune, that's the thing that comes out of the ether or out of my head or wherever it comes from.
Mm-hmm.
I think what enriches that is when we start playing around with the harmonies, and then, Neil's the real harmony freak, because he, when he was a kid, he spent quite a lot of time being in a choir. He knows a lot about, music, as in music theory. And so he brings that little bit of kind of magic to sort of, finesse some of the melodies by putting some harmonies on top. And I mean, that's a bit of a sort of a two-way thing between me and Neil, because sometimes he thinks up of a line that really is the gold dust bit. Sometimes I might do. Neil has like loads of ideas, and quite often I'm kind of the one sort of saying, okay, those 5 lines, let's just reduce it to 3 or 2 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like a little conversation just to kind of get to the end point.
Are you influenced by anything other than music when you sit down to write?
Well, I think in terms of influencing the writing, the influence is sort of stuff going on in the day to day, and as I said, there's that kind of therapy aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
I quite like, in terms of that stuff, apart from the kind of the angsty therapy stuff, I think I'm always quite inspired by the sort of people. I suppose it's mainly people, but it's the kind of the mundane, everyday people, but with kind of incredible stories sitting behind them. So there's a song on our Pictures album called The Great Omani, about sort of a sort of documentary film I saw about a kind of an 80-year-old stuntman and his story. And there's a song on our last album called Billy Mason, which was a story about a guy, a local person that sort of was this kind of, basically a kind of whacked out kind of inventor guy. Kind of created, built an aeroplane in his own house, in the Second World War. And it's just sort of unusual characters. I'm always drawn to that kind of stuff. So I mean, I suppose the other thing that kind of has an influence on me would be, there's certain types of literature, sort of poetry, and sort of things like Lewis Carroll and Dylan Thomas, and also sort of like some sort of surrealism has played a certain part in it. I quite like surrealist films, particularly Louis Buñuel is a particular favourite, and some of those
Mm-hmm. Man in the Woods seems to come to mind for a somewhat surreal feel.
Yeah, and that's I mean, that's it. Again, thinking about sort of like, you know, unusual people. Like where I live, well, not so much where I live now, but where I grew up. It's kind of an interesting sort of like housing estate area, but it kind of it's a sort of an estate that kind of built up since the sort of early 20th century, you know, where kind of woodland had been sort of cleared, and going back early into the early and mid 20th century. It was a sort of place where people went, you know, bought a patch of land and, you know, kind of built a cabin or whatever just to live in with their own little patch, and, you know, sort of self-sufficient, or actually quite frontiery in a way. When I was quite a young kid, you know, there were sort of people that were still living this kind of like, you know, frontier type existence, but the kind of the woodland was kind of, you know, getting smaller and smaller, and they were getting kind of closer and closer to the outside world. And, you know, I sort of remember sort of stories about, you know, don't go into the wood over here because there's a strange old lady that, you know, like might put you in a cooking pot. And, you know, there was a guy, I remember an old boy that got kind of evicted when by the council when they were going to kind of build new houses, and it was all on the news and stuff. This poor old guy getting kind of dragged out, and, you know, his house was going to get knocked down so that, you know, loads of new uniform type houses could be built. So that was about that, really, you know. I suppose in terms of the style of the song, I was in my, you know, having a bit of a Sid Barrett moment there. That would be one where I was sort of thinking, yeah, what if I was in a band like Pink Floyd in about 1967?
Well, there's Pink Floyd came to mind when we were talking about that contrast between the sort of the happy music and the dark lyrics. 'Cause Free 4 is one of my favorite songs by them. That memories of a man in his old age are the deeds of a man in his prime. Shuffle in the gloom of the sick room and talk to yourself as you die. And then it's this sort of bouncy, it's almost a show tune.
Yeah, you've got to love that kind of juxtaposition of happy and dark. But you know, that's what life's like, isn't it? You know, one minute it's very humorous, the next minute there's something quite grim going on, and sometimes we laugh at the grimness. I mean, I don't think there's anything unusual about that. It's what life is like.
Now, I don't want to give away any spoilers necessarily, but is there supposed to be a hidden track at the end of Man in the Woods? If there is, I don't think it's on the version I've got. Right.
Have you got a what have you got? Have you got a vinyl, or you got a CD, or?
I've got the download from that.
Download. So. Yeah, if you get yourself a CD.
Okay.
You might find yourself a little mystery at the end. Yeah.
All right. I won't say any more about it for those who have not yet found it. Couple last questions. What do you listen to on a day-to-day basis?
A day-to-day basis, I don't know, because I listen to loads of different stuff all the time. And, you know, I mean, some of it might surprise people, what I listen to. So, while I was driving around today, I was listening to Charlie Parker and Led Zeppelin, and the Beatles, actually, on the way home. I haven't listened to them for a little while. And then, when I was out sort of walking about yesterday, I was listening to the Stooges and a bit of AC/DC, and yeah, just kind of whatever. I was listening to Robert Johnson this morning as well. So, what was it? It was Sam and Dave last night. Simon and Garfunkel. That's probably one that would surprise people. Yeah, just kind of loads of different stuff.
I enjoy that because people tend to think that I don't know if they do tend to think, maybe this is just me projecting, that maybe they put people in a box thinking the music they play is the music they listen to all the time. Yeah.
I mean, one that again sort of surprises people. I mean, I've had funny conversations with people at gigs about this. You know, sort of. I quite like 70s reggae. So Johnny Clark is a particular favourite of mine. You know, as his Culture and Prince Farai. I mean, I love all that stuff. And you know, probably people see sort of like three middle-aged white guys jumping around, sort of shouting connection. And I mean, if you spoke to Neil and Steve, you'd probably get, you'd get quite a lot of variance again. I mean, Steve is probably more kind of British indie band type, type leanings than me. I always think that's interesting, like what you think people listen to and then what they actually listen to. I mean, I'm just looking at my record player at the moment. The disc that's actually on there at the moment is by Mose Allison.
Ah.
So, jazz, reggae. See, obviously I've got all that kind of 60s stuff and punk stuff as well. But
well, we'll look forward to the next album being your jazz odyssey.
You never know. I'll start learning the piano a bit better. Knocking on a few chords.
So what's next? What are you?
I was just, one other thought. Sorry,
sure.
you probably
No problem.
this bit off, but I was also thinking about the television personalities. That's an old band I've discovered recently. I'm quite enjoying. I was reading about Bob Pollard from Guided by Voices, and because Guided by Voices has been a bit of a favourite of mine over the years. And, partly it's about the kind of volume of output, but I've always kind of quite enjoyed his kind of stage persona, and but I've also been drawn to the fact that I think he's kind of been working as a teacher, and balancing that in his kind of music kind of business. And I was thinking, well, so I actually started out as a secondary school as a teacher, and I think there's some sort of link there between being a teacher and standing in front of a group of sort of steely punters and trying to win them over, and being in a band and writing songs, writing lessons. It's probably some sort of great similarity there.
Well, it gives you something to talk about. That's another thing that you would hear as that happens to comedians sometimes. If you listen to their albums and they start off, the first few albums or the first few years of their career, they're talking about what's happened in their daily life, and as their career took off, everything's, they're talking about hotels and airplanes all of a sudden.
Yeah, life changes, exactly. It's just what goes on around you. And, the behaviours and things that people do, they tend to be the same, just in different kind of contexts, I think. Whether that's in the context of, working in an office or, in and around a band, So, okay.
So what's next? What's coming up? What are you guys up to in the next few months?
Well, we've got quite a few shows coming up. It's been really strange. We book our own shows, and that's surprisingly difficult, but for reasons I can't quite work out, other than we're kind of busy people, and it can be quite a complex process. We had so the album came out in September, and we had a big show in London, launch show, which was sort of successful. And then we couldn't get any gigs in October. Like, we just couldn't find anything that was available that we could book in. So we've done nothing for a month. And then kicking off from Saturday, we've got a whole bunch of shows, all in England, but, sort of getting around the country throughout November, taking us into December, where it kind of finishes up with another show in London. And then we're sort of booking stuff in for the new year. And we're hoping we've got a show in Las Vegas in February. Which will be the first time we've been in the US since about 2007. But other than that, we just kind of keep trying to book some shows and hoping to get some festival gigs in the summer. Probably in the not too distant, I'll be trying to write a few more songs. Start thinking about the next album.
Any chance that you'll bounce a few more shows in the States off of that Las Vegas appearance?
Well, let me tell you, Nick, that has been something we've been trying to crack for a good couple of years now. And in fact, if we go back about 6 months, I sort of started the process of trying to get some gigs in the US. And I was sort of talking to our mates in the Woggles, who great band, really, really helpful chaps, and they play a hell of a lot of shows in the US. And they gave us a few contacts, but just kind of couldn't make it happen, either because of lack of interest on the venue or the promoter's part, or it was too expensive, or both. And what sort of brought it home to us with this Las Vegas exchange rate isn't quite as good as it used to be from a
Right.
kind of a UK perspective, and the sort of visa requirements seemingly are quite heavy now compared with what they used to be. So, and then if you sort of factor in, you've got to take time off work and make sure your kind of family are not left in the lurch and all the rest of it. It's it's just really difficult. I don't, we just need. I think we need a manager who can kind of come in and just sort of sort it out for us. Probably that would help.
Yeah, everybody assumes that any band they see automatically has that manager, has somebody working all that stuff out for them.
Yeah. So I'm sure we can. We will keep plugging away, and hopefully something will kind of come up. And certainly, we've had things come up where people say, come and play this show, but I'm not going to give you any, basically I can't guarantee you I'm certainly not going to pay for your airfare.
Right.
I can't put you up unless you want to sleep on my floor and that kind of stuff. And, maybe there'll be some money in it, but I can't guarantee, we're not going to do that kind of thing. So
Right.
get those kind of offers, but it's just the right offers, isn't it? That's what we need.
Well, I hope to see you out here at some point, or if I make it over there, I'll look for you.
Yeah. And, we will keep trying. We will keep trying.
Yeah, I think I got through a lot with this. I don't know if there's anything you feel I left out.
No, I don't think so. We had quite a long conversation.
Yes.
I think, yeah. It's a funny thing because when I'm in my day-to-day life, I try not to even tell people about my kind of musical thing, and then I don't know. Sometimes people pick up on something they've heard from somebody or whatever, and then they ask me a question, and then of course that I'm thinking, maybe they're interested, so I kind of start talking enthusiastically, but I'm always really just looking and thinking, no, is this actually what they want, or are they just being polite and have I said too much? It's hard to tell because, like you say, it is difficult to know what people are interested in sometimes.
But do you ever find that people from your day life pop up at a show and suddenly recognize you?
Not in a sort of as starkly as that. I mean, I've had a couple of things. So I've just started a job recently, which is is in Medway, and it's basically the first time in quite a long time, certainly since before we started putting records out or anything, that I've actually worked in the Medway area, and I've had a couple of people come up to me and say things like, "Hey, do I know you from somewhere? Do you do some music or something?" You kind of go, "Oh yeah, I occasionally squeak on my guitar around. You may have seen me around some of the pubs and stuff." Kind of leave it at that. So that's kind of the most it's been. I did have one where my last job, where this guy kind of came up and said, basically said, "Oh, I've been coming to see you play for a long time." Which is really, he was really sweet. He was kind of, nice about it. It wasn't over the top. And, he was quite sort of down to earth. So we just, managed to get on like two blokes that happened to be into music, sort of thing. But but it's quite rare. It's quite rare.
It'd be great if somebody referenced an album back to you. "Hey, have you heard this band, Len Price 3? They're my favorite band." No, I don't know. I think those guys are terrible.
Yeah, I did have one. The only thing I've had, other sort of anecdote like that. I did go to. I went to a concert in Hyde Park in London, and it was Carole King. Right? And so there were like thousands of people there, and then I'm standing there with my mate, listening to whatever, I Feel the Earth Move or whatever. And this guy comes up and taps me on the shoulder and goes, "Excuse me, mate, you're in the Len Price 3, aren't you?" I was like, "Yeah, afraid I am." And he's like, "Oh," and then he kind of went on sort of saying that he was kind of really into the band and that. And I was sort of, this is really, really nice, really sweet, but actually I just want to kind of listen to Carole King right now.
Right.
You want to talk about my band? We're not as good as this, So it's kind of, just for that, sort of 5 minutes, it was like marginally inconvenient. But other than that, it's it doesn't impact my day-to-day life.
That's not
fair.
That's not the worst story that could possibly happen, I guess.
No, it was, you know, it was lovely of the guy to come and say, you know, he was really into it or whatever. So I'd never knock that back. I mean, I still, you know, I still am genuinely touched, you know, when we get invited to go and play. You know, I mean, you feel it particularly when you go to other countries. So there was a time, a year, 18 months ago, we were invited to go and play at this gig in this festival in Spain, at Leon. And it was the biggest crowd we'd ever played to. It was about 600 people. Mm-hmm. And they were all going, like, really mad for it. And they all, you know, they knew songs. They were singing the songs back to us and stuff. And I was thinking, this is just amazing. And I was, you know, back when we started, I was kind of like, I just want to do these songs, you know, play them in a few bars, maybe sell a few CDs, see how we go. But, you know, to go to another country where they, you know, where English isn't even their first language, and they're kind of singing your songs back to you, it's
right.
It's really, you know, it's really special. And I'm just really, you know, grateful that people would even take the time to listen to it, let alone, you know, buy any of it and kind of come to a show, you know. So,
well, if you,
yeah, I've lost that. You know, I'm still, you know, it's the gratitude. You know, I'm very grateful for people just taking the time to listen. Really.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me. It's been a delightful conversation.
My pleasure, Nick. You know, it's my pleasure to, you know, it's been a pleasure to speak to you. So thanks for giving us this opportunity to, you know, appear verbally on your program. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome.
An arrow to the head isn't always a trick.
Thanks again to Glenn Page for taking so much time to speak with me. The new album again is Kentish Longtails, and you can find out more about them on their Facebook page by searching for the Len Price 3. And if you're in the Las Vegas area, you're luckier than the rest of us here stateside because you have an opportunity to see the band on February 23rd when they play the Triple B as part of the High Rollers Scooter Rally. You might have to have a scooter to participate in the actual rally, but I don't think you need one to see the band. And closing out the podcast, we have New Age Parents, a track from Tommy Ryman's new album, Having the Time of My Life. If you're listening to this podcast the day it comes out, then you're getting a preview of the album, which comes out tomorrow. And for everyone else, the album is out on Stand Up Records January 19th. You can find out more about him at TommyRyman.com. And here's a little insight into the life of a humble cardigan-wearing, clarinet-playing comic from Minnesota. This is Tommy Ryman with New Age Parents.
I like doing comedy, guys. This has been fun. My parents have been very supportive of my comedy career. They were really excited when I did Last Comic Standing. I got to the semifinals of Last Comic, which is cool. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Made it all the way to the semifinals. Some of my buddies made fun of me. They're like, why didn't you make it further than the semifinals, Tommy? How come you didn't make it past the semifinals? And I was like, well, I'm from Minnesota. I watch a lot of Minnesota sports. So I thought the semifinals was as far as you could go. Yeah. I thought I won Last Comic Standing for a long time. Called my mom up. I was like, start buying yourself some houses. I got some semifinals money coming. I knew my dad was proud because he bought me a Sam's Club bag of pistachios. This is the largest bag of pistachios I've ever seen in my entire life. It was huge. I was like, he didn't say he was proud or that he loved me, but I was like, I understand. I get it. Thank you very much. Yeah, my parents are great. My mom is fun. She's a real kind of new agey. She's a real hippie. I don't know if you have any new age type people in your lives that are into like crystals and energy and drums. She really likes that stuff. Like, I called her a while ago and she's been getting weirder because I was like, "What are you up to?" Yeah. I go, "What are you doing?" And she goes, "I'm activating rivers." I was like, "Oh, okay. So you got a job with the city or something? Cleaning up rivers? That sounds nice." And she goes, "No, I get my crystals out and I go to the mouth of the river and I do a whole ceremony and then I throw the crystal in and it activates the river." And I was like, it sounds like we're going to put you in a home soon. That's what that sounds like. That is terrifying. What? So you've just been running around town throwing crystals in the rivers and not one person stopped you. Okay. But she loves doing it. She gets really excited about it. She's been driving around the country doing different trips in different rivers. And so after a while, I was like, you know what? Maybe I should learn more about this river activation in case I have to take over the family business. I want to make sure I properly activate the river. So I kind of asked her, I was like, can you explain it to me one more time, like how you do it? Like, so you put the crystal in, then what does the river do to show that it's been activated? Like, how do you, like, does it start bubbling or change color? Like a rainbow shoot out of it or something? Or maybe people tubing down the river get extra drunk if it's an activated river? It's like, I'm super wasted. This river must have been activated recently. Normally it doesn't hit me this fast, but I'm very tipsy. Like, yeah, it was probably Barb, dude. She's a really good river activator. Well, she's the only river activator right now, but her son's still learning how to do it. He's on ponds right now. He's working his way up. It's going to be really good. Sometimes I tease her, too. Like, I called her a while ago. I was like, where are you? And she's like, I'm in Montana. I just activated a river. I was like, I already activated that river. Ooh, you just double activated that river, Mom. We better call Montana. My dad's funny, too. He's goofy. He likes camping in nature, too. He took me whitewater rafting when I was 9 years old. When I was 9. Do you see this today, right now? I weigh 125 pounds right now. Can you picture me when I was 9? I weighed 38 pounds. I weighed 38 pounds. I had bigger glasses, and my dad walked into the house and looked at that and was like, that kid is ready to hit some rapids. Let's get him in the boat. Yep. But I wasn't ready. I was not ready. I flew out of the boat, because that's what happens when you weigh 38 pounds. And you're on an inflatable raft, and it bumps into a rock, it just launches you about 8 feet into the water. They had to throw a rope, pull me back in, like, you okay, Tommy? You having fun? I was like, no, I'm not having fun. My cardigan's all wet, and I should be at home playing clarinet. I don't know what I'm doing in this river right now. This river hasn't been activated. You know how dangerous this is? I could have died.
Neil Young,